What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Professional Hippies podcast. We're very excited and extremely grateful to have you back. If you have been a long-time listener, we've been doing a little bit of a push. We have one favor to ask, and I think this is an episode you're definitely going to tune into. So if you're not going to do it now, maybe do it later. Leave us a review or drop us a comment. Let us know, hey, how you digging the flow? We've made some changes. Let us know what you're thinking, and the best way to do that is to leave us a review for the algorithm. Today we have somebody that we are very excited to have on the show. It's Crystal Morris. How you doing?
Hi, guys. I'm fantastic. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on because this is an episode that we get a lot of questions about, or a topic, right? So this episode's been a long time coming, microdosing. We talk about it. A lot of people in our space talk about it. But I'm excited to have you on to talk about some nuance to that and just a little bit of like the resume, if you will, a little bit of the background. What I love about the spin that you come from is coming from the corporate world, right? Coming from like a traditional model that I think a lot of people in our audience can relate to. And so, I thought about this a couple different ways. Like, I wonder how many people are out there are thinking about, hey, I'm in a job that I'm unfulfilled in, right? And I want to make the next move, or I'm in a rut in life and I don't know how to get out of it. So I don't think your past lends itself just to helping executives, which is primarily who you focus on, right? Mm-hmm. I think it applies in a lot of different arenas in life where you have kind of this past life when you sent over some of the info, right? But I also love the way you're choosing to lead your current life. So I think there's a lot of arenas of people that would benefit if you're in a job that maybe isn't resonating with you, or you're making some lifestyle choices that you're unsure of how to kick, or, how to find that next North Star, so to speak. Yeah. And I think this episode's going to be really a good one. So how to do with that? Anything you'd add to that? Anything you'd take away?
No, I think universe is a very interesting thing. And I will say, before finding psychedelics, I was a total atheist, like did not believe in anything. And, I think the way that my life transpired and in leaping from the corporate world has definitely shaped and reframed the way that I look at things. But I think it's one of those situations where you can take the door or not. And there are many doors. And I feel like that's kind of my purpose is really helping people to see their options. Because I also know that my path can't be everyone else's path. So I feel like that's kind of the bridge that I'm meant to work here, and helping people find their purpose, unlock themselves and their potential, as well as, get the hell out of a job that they hate.
Yeah, I think everybody can relate to that, by the way, like being at some stage or some position in life and you're like, man, this is not where I want to be. But what I love so when we met at the Condor Approach Mastermind Retreat, however we frame that. And one thing I loved about the conversation that we met, speaking just like organically, authentically, and I think I apologized for something I said to you, and you're like, hey, look, that's cool. Don't worry about it. Like, I really appreciate when people are authentic. I just like totally said something out of pocket, and I was like, shit, I don't know you like that. So my bad. Let me reel that statement back in. But I think that's also
proper sarcasm, which I'm fluent in. So I always appreciate that about people.
By the way, you got a rare apology too. That usually doesn't happen.
Well, you put off such a great energy, and I'm so glad we can make this happen, because I know there's so many people that are curious about this, and it's not like you're just stepping into this because, in the way I'm seeing it, it's not like you were like, hey, this is what makes sense to do next in my life. The way you kind of described to me, it seemed like it was more pulling a thread, and the next series of events started unfolding from that. Like, you were doing pretty good in the corporate world. Like most people would look at you and say, like, you're crazy. Like, why wouldn't you keep going that direction? Like, you had what everybody kind of aspires to do, right? So,
I worked for 3 of the biggest FANG companies there are, and I was fortunate to like build a large career at Tesla, and then eventually found my way to another company. And the world had different plans, because with the pandemic, I found myself in Portland and was like, God, I hate my job. Like, I literally hated the women I worked with. And by some weird experience, I found myself going to Boise, Idaho for Halloween in 2020. And that was the first time I had taken DMT and had never done psychedelics before in my life. And then the following weekend did LSD. And I remember walking around, and it was not ceremonial in any way. I mean, maybe like the intention of like kind of like calmly coming up together with the guy I was hanging out with. But we were walking around the damn 7-Eleven parking lot, like drinking coconut water and eating Twizzlers for hours. Like, it was beautiful and everything I needed it to be, and fun. And I remember walking around going like, I need to quit my job. And there was some events that happened later on that weekend where someone very close to me committed suicide. And it led for me to be able to like take bereavement time. And the day I committed, where I was like, I'm going to quit, was when the stock market went completely crazy out of nowhere. And my Tesla stock created a path for me. Like, it was like, here's your safety net, now jump. And I remember going and I tried to quit. My boss told me to take leave, and I took 2 months of leave. And within a month of being off and, experiencing people in Clubhouse, something was like, nope, you're going to step the F away. And I quit. I called my boss. I'm like, I'm going to retire. And 2 months later, I found myself in Austin, not knowing a single person. Like, I literally was called here and had not really done much psychedelics besides just like the occasional LSD trip on Christmas until almost a year later. And it's so interesting how that thread was just like kind of led me to different people and different paths. So I think it's all something that, yes, many people would have killed for the life that I had. And then I also look at the fact that like, if everything that had led me up to that led me to be able to quit and step away without fear, because if I was still with Tesla, which was a company I love and still love to this day, I might still be in that rat race. And while I might have a whole lot more stock, I'd be fucking miserable.
It snaps up for that. I think that's beautiful. And thank you for having the courage to do that, right? Because one of the things that we're seeing emerge in kind of this next wave of interest in psychedelics is a lot of people just having curiosity, needing answers. And I'm with you on, I would dare to say, most people's first experiences are nowhere around the fucking realm of ceremonial. The Twizzlers and whatever, the chocolate fuck. Yeah, that's I bet that was banging. Right. I bet those Twizzlers were fire, too.
The fruit Twizzlers, the ones with like the juiciness inside.
Oh, yeah.
Were like
Perfect.
fantastic.
Perfect.
Heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that's not mandatory in South America. They're like, no, this is how we meet God now.
It's proper dieta.
Right, we offer the Twizzler.
It's ayahuasca juiciness in the So man. A question on to that, right? So you got to a point, it sounded like, in your career, you were just like, I'm not happy in this situation, right? And you're at a point, too, which I think a lot of people get surprised about nowadays because it's happening more. You worked very hard to get to that spot that you were at, and you were making a great income, right? Like, you were living the dream of what when we're younger, we think, like, if we strive hard, we'll get to this point, we'll make a great salary, we can have what we want.
Yeah.
Was the decision of, like, I'm making money, but I'm not happy, did that start happening before the trips that you did, or afterwards that you were like a correlation between money and the happiness happened?
I think it's all of it. I mean, I think, part of my own healing journey started around 2016 after I got divorced and really doing more inner work around, masculine and feminine energy and dealing with my own shit regarding my divorce and my part in it. And even with all of that, there's always this sense of like something's missing. And I think what the psychedelics really led to was like realizing that you aren't going to get the answers without really going deep. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck who are in the corporate world or who maybe have never tried psychedelics, because they love living in that middle space of safety. And with really wanting to achieve things of like true happiness, which, to be honest, for a long time, I couldn't even define. Like, you have your manifesting lists and whatever the hell someone's trying to sell to you, but a lot of it's so very 3D of like, oh, I want the house, I want this, I want a partner. But most people can't really define what that truly means for them, including myself for a long time. And with that, it was the idea that in choosing to step away, I had to make room for something else to come in. And so I took a flying leap off the cliff. Again, very fortunate that I could do that, and not everyone can. But literally, I was just on a coaching call with people in my microdosing group, and I'm having clients who are in the same loop, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, well, how are you creating boundaries in your life to create space for things to come into your world? Because right now you are back to back to back, and you aren't living in a state where you have any room for anything to come in.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so it sounds like there was something already implanted in there. And then when the trips happen and then you start discovering these things, it started helping separate the two things from your happiness and then the making money. But to also point out too, as well, it's not like you stopped working and then you just went down this path. Like you just pivoted and went towards something that's going to make you happier while also now doing well at that also. So it's not like the work stopped. It was just like, oh, I have to redirect what I think is most important to me.
And what's funny is when I quit, I was doing relationship coaching. I was actually coaching a lot of corporate exec guys who were cheating on their wives.
Heyo.
And like there's a market for that because they were so unhappy and miserable in their life, and obviously not confronting that aspect, right? And in true manifestation form, I was like, I want $12,500 a month. And then 3 days later, my now business partner, I also am a COO of a cannabis vending machine company, which we're starting up. And he calls me and he's like, can you be my COO? And I said, well, I have no clue how to do that, but sure. And I'm not working more than 20 hours a week. And, to this day, like we're going to be launching at MJ BizCon next week in Vegas. But with that, it was allowing space of things and things I had no clue what I was even getting myself involved into. And it wasn't until basically a year ago to the day where I had my first true mushroom ceremony. And with that, it led me into this path of like, holy shit. Like it was like, Neo in the Matrix when he's like, starts learning stuff. He's like, I need this. And so I started doing it every month. A lot of times hero doses, including ayahuasca and other modalities. And just something in me was like, I'm going to do this every month for a year at least and see what comes through.
Sorry, I'm listening. I was just...
No, you're good.
His tail's going everywhere on that.
So, yeah, I want to add something to that because I think what's really important about that is the vulnerability and the transparency, rather, of like, hey, this is what my journey looked like. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people that get into psychedelics or wanting to experiment with psychedelics are either intimidated by hearing other people's experience in depth and volume and thinking, especially people that listen to our podcast, I get questions about like, well, okay, you started 12 years ago. Like, where do I start? What am I supposed to pull out first? Like, how do I do this? Not realizing like most people fumble their way into it. And our goal is, and I would argue, with your practice as well, is making sure people are stepping into it with a protocol, with a much more gentle on-ramp than, just blasting through the universe, trying to just grab on and hold on and pray and wish. And so I really appreciate like the transparency and the vulnerability there, because I think it's important. Like, hey, everybody's got to learn everything from somebody at some point. And so it's not about like you knowing everything. It's just you've concentrated on this subject in this field, and hey, that's why you're becoming a resource. And so anybody can, right? And this is a new frontier for a lot of people. So hats off to you for just being like, hey, this is what kicked it off for me.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's become very transparent, and that not everyone's journey is going to look exactly the same, and I definitely stayed in the sense of, well, I haven't been doing this long enough, or what do I really know? Because there's people who have been doing this for 10 plus years, and who am I to try to hold space for other people? And, I'm very fortunate that the first person that held my journeys, we did it as private ceremonies, and I got to see a lot of the true intention around holding space. I got to see what happens when you don't do dieta, when someone else showed up and started puking for half the time with mushrooms. I'm like, that doesn't look right.
Yeah.
So like I got to see all of these experiences of like why certain things happen, and what space holding looks like. And I also got to see what I don't like. And I think that's what comes through is like trusting your own intuition around it. But, you know, on the flip side, as I've shared my experiences, I've heard a number of stories about bad trips, or, you know, I wouldn't say anything's a bad trip, but bad first experiences. Like one of my close friends, his first experience was throwing a bunch of mushrooms into orange juice and not knowing how much it was. And then he and his friend went to a sushi restaurant and then tried to drive across through a Target parking lot. Like no, like,
Dude, that'll do it right there. That's a great way to scar yourself.
right. You know, and I'm like, this is what we're here for. It's not necessarily this entitlist, there's only one way, but it's keeping people from doing the dumb mistakes that we're going to do because we don't realize the situation we're putting ourselves into.
Because imagine if so, you know, as it's becoming more prominent, imagine having someone that you could just call and just be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Can I have a guide? Instead of why most people usually get into it is like, hey, I bought it off a friend. We're going to go take it. Hopefully this works out the way we want it to.
I got it from the dark web on the web, and I have no clue what to do with it. You know, even just dumb questions. Like, you know, I think I remember watching a Ron White and Joe Rogan podcast where, maybe it was Joe Rogan, but he was talking about his first ayahuasca trip and wearing white. And, you know, he was like, oh, it's so they can see you running away. And then like my intuition was like, oh, it's so they can see who shot themselves. Like, you know, there's definitely some things that they're not written down. There's no Bible of like how to get into psychedelics. You know, note to self, someone should write it. But
I mean, there's a lot of great guides out there. It's just, you got to dig a little bit to get the recommendations to it, right? And Jellybean, Leo, everybody.
I think too as well what you were saying, like not everyone's experience is the same, right? And the approach that you're taking with that is awesome, because I feel like there are a lot of people that do get into it and then they feel like they can start coaching, but they think their path is the only way. Like this is the way it worked for me, so it should work for everybody else, right? And without going, it's kind of like the person that hasn't had a bad trip yet.
yeah,
Right? They're telling everybody about it and their grandmother and everybody should do it until they have a bad trip, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, now I get it, the situation now." But
And most of the work you're doing is on a micro level, right? Like that's the focus
both.
right
I actually
now,
do
or?
both. So now, we've been holding space with some of my medicine sisters for women's groups. And then I literally just had both of my current microdosing clients want to do larger dose journeys this month or in the next month. So I think people are approaching it from different ways. So I had one person do a 2.5 gram dose with a dear friend that I trust before they came into the microdosing group, because they were also weaning off of ketamine. And then I had another guy who was super apprehensive because he wanted, you know, he's a corporate accountant, and he was like, I want to make sure that my son won't notice I'm on things. So we kind of started him off slow, and now he's like, so let's talk about the bigger dose. So now he's ready. So I think the angles that they're coming at it is totally different, but seeing both everything from corporate people and seeing the flow states and getting them out of their routines and habits all the way to, you know, soccer moms, like, I think there's a place for all of it, particularly as it comes into the damn holiday season where everyone kind of just gets a little bit unhinged.
Is this where you feel like the most pressure comes into, like, say, the C-suite life is around the holidays?
I mean, I think generally from a Q4 perspective, I think it can be very stressful. I know with Tesla it always was, but generally, you know, you have more holidays, you have more things to kind of ease off. But I think that's where the lack of being able to consolidate your personal life and your corporate life like comes together, where they're like, oh, now I have to show up and be the husband, the, you know, great father for Christmas, whatever it is, and still do this other work. And when you're living a lie during that whole period, whether it's in your personal life or your corporate life, it all just kind of just feels very weighty.
Where do you feel like the balance is between, because this is something that I think I've struggled with most of my adult life, is feeling like, hey, do I want to throw all of my effort into building my own thing, right? Or do I also want to throw a lot of my effort into something I'm very like passionate about? And I think, I'm just going to go on a limb here, but I would think in most corporations, you start out with the idea of, hey, we're changing the world, right? This thing that we're working on is changing the world or making some meaningful impact. And then someday you wake up and it's Groundhog Day, right? You're in charge of people, or it's the same stuff kind of cycling through, and you realize like, where's the time gone? This isn't what I'm happy about. So like, there's a question in there somewhere, but like, how do you find the balance? If you don't necessarily want to be your own startup, if you don't want to do your own thing, but you don't love what you're doing, like, then what do you do? What's the answer there?
Well, and here's the big problem is, I think with Instagram and, overall like social media, everyone's been led to believe that everyone should be an entrepreneur. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. Like there needs to still be workers. Otherwise we're going to have a complete collapse of the economy of, other businesses being able to scale. But what I do in particular, so I've been actually studying the gene keys, which is similar to human design, but it really talks about like your purpose and your life's work. And so in my microdosing programs, I actually look through their charts and see where they are not living in alignment with their personal purpose and their life's work and gifts, and help them to reframe where they can possibly make shifts in their work. So are they in the wrong industry? How can they take their true gifts and reshift that into something that may still allow them the safety and security of having a paycheck, like a steady paycheck and working for someone else, but something that will allow them the shift into really feeling more fulfilled in their day-to-day.
Yeah.
When you're talking, when a lot of people, when they get the mindset right in that aspect to do that, a lot of people that haven't taken psychedelics, they think, oh, I'm just going to want to not have all my responsibilities anymore. I'm just going to want to drop. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to become lazy. Well, really, it's just helping you organize, I think, your perception on things, right? And so it just allows you to say, oh, that's not as important as I thought it is. It's still important, but I need to put things in front of that. How do you talk to that with your clients when they're coming to the situation, they're worried, like, I feel like I'm just going to forget everything. I'm going to become a lazy person, and realizing like, oh no, this is actually a medicine that'll help you get to what you're wanting to do.
Mm-hmm. Well,
or they're afraid of just saying fuck it, right? Like, or they just snap like a twig,
right? Well, and I think that's the beauty of plant medicine in general. I think it'll confront you to your truest of truths, whether you want to see it or not. Particularly grandmother, like she will smack you upside the head and make you like see what you didn't want to see. But with that, it's up to them to really make the shifts. And I think the biggest thing is recognizing what aspects of their life they are willing to change, and creating structure and frameworks to support what might not be able to change right now and shift. Because
can
I
you
think
give some examples there?
Yeah. Let's see. I think the biggest thing is the idea of like leaving your corporate job, right? Like, so if it's shifting into a different department, if it's creating some new boundaries with your boss, if it's maybe shifting into a different department, which I already said.
But it doesn't always have to be leaving.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be leaving. And
right.
And even with that, I think taking on additional projects and being able to be in a state where you feel engaged again. And it might be leaving. I mean, the reality is a lot of times, I mean, I generally didn't stay at a company for more than 2 years prior to a few companies, but I got to the point where I was like, I was no longer interested in being there because they weren't growing as fast as I was. And I think that's the other part of it, is recognizing when you've outgrown something, a relationship, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a job, and knowing that if you want to continue to expand, you need to get the hell out.
That's a pretty bold statement too. Like because some of the companies you were at are not small companies.
Yeah.
But I think it's also about realizing the bandwidth of that opportunity for your lane, so to speak, right? So if you're outpacing that, it doesn't matter what the market cap is for that company. Looking at what they're allocating for what's going to make you feel fulfilled, and seeing if, am I hearing you right on that? Like seeing if that aligns with what your vision is, and if it's like, hey, if that's not meshing up, like give yourself the permission to go where you feel called, right? I love that.
I feel like that's a common thing these days. It used to be, dedication to this company, and you'll move up. And I feel like that's kind of gone out the window. More of, like you just said, it's more hopping around. Of like, oh, this company, they've kind of capped out on being able to move up, but I know I can move up, so I just got to go to a different location and do it.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, being a long-term employee isn't necessarily celebrated anymore. You get maybe a 2-3.5% raise if you're lucky. Particularly if you're under the big umbrellas of a large company where they literally force rank people in like the most disgusting way, and they're like, oh no, we have too many medium or overachievers, so we need to knock some people down just to hit this, bell curve. But with all of that, there's also the intention of knowing that most times the companies don't really have your best interest at heart. And so it's still being able to have that safety net of what you want out of a career, but knowing like what you really need to get out of it in order to feel safe in making the next step forward. So is it taking a leave? Is it taking some time away and really getting going on a medicine journey and like figuring out what is truly important to you? Because a lot of times when you take off the stressor of having the job that is taking up 60 hours of your week, you'd be surprised what else you can achieve during that time. But again, going back to the idea that not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur too, and recognizing that it might just mean shifting into a completely different industry that you never thought of.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that I'd love to hear your perspective around is like, one, like, okay, how many hours were you working, right? And that old life that you kind of call it. And then also with the advent of social media portraying entrepreneurship. And I think there's definitely like a middle ground. Gary Vee proselytizes all the time of being kind of a solopreneur, where it's like, hey, if you're really passionate about something and you're making 60 grand or 70 grand at your job, finding a way to monetize that to replace your income versus looking for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year. Because some people just don't realize like what the trade-offs look like for getting to that level in any kind of reasonable time frame and any kind of reasonable sacrifice, right? So if you're in a place where you're not exactly happy at your occupation, one of the things I love you bringing in is shifting versus leaving. Is like, okay, I know personally, as you were saying that, I was reflecting on relationships I've had where one real authentic conversation away from everything being great, amazing. But there's like all this internal pressure and tension and story casting of like putting bullshit that's not really them, but I'm like throwing shit on their plate, and then you just air it out one good time and they're like, oh yeah, like no problem, I can stop doing that. It's like the clouds part, God comes down, it's like, this is your best friend again, so it's like, hey, maybe a job could serve that way too, but bringing in kind of the the shifting, like, hey, how would you say like microdosing can serve as an avenue for that, while also recognizing who would microdosing not serve?
Well, I think one of the things I always preempt people starting the program or starting to microdose is like, you will not be able to compartmentalize your shit. Like, it is going to become next to impossible. So I literally, again, my corporate accountant, he was like, I was sitting in this meeting and so help me, I wanted to like get up and like strangle this person. I'm like, yeah, that's the medicine working. Like it's cut back on your rage a little bit, but you can't live out of authenticity. And so with that, I find I can't tell a lie. Like, I can't be dishonest with myself. So I think if it would have done me so much better to be able to speak back in my past life to say, hey, you know what, I'm not feeling valued. I'm sick of having every downsized manager become my new boss. Where can I go? Where can I advance in this area? But I think the larger part of it is people being able to set boundaries that can possibly help them bring ease into their life and not always being people pleasers, because that's the other part of it is we keep being fed the, okay, if you keep doing this job, you keep grinding, you keep doing this, eventually you'll move up. And that's not generally the case, because there's so much politics, there's so much things behind the scenes that you don't understand on who's going to move up into a company, who's going to be, upper management, whatever that looks like. And so really getting honest with what you need to get out of that job. And is it really bringing you value? And I think that's the thing that we tell ourselves a lot is, oh, this job is bringing me this. It's safety. I love my job. I've worked so hard to get this job. And with that, being too afraid to say, well, okay, does this still serve me now? And I think, running a state assessment on ourselves around like, well, what stories am I telling myself around why this is so important and why am I afraid to leave it? No different than, the corporate person who's been in the 20-year marriage that they don't even recognize their partner after COVID.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had a situation where when you're doing your consultation before you started the program, they're like, I love my job, everything's good. And then after they started the program, they're like, I hate my job. I want to leave this thing. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. What happened? And you're like, hold on. Let's not leave the job yet. But if they're coming into it like, I hate my job, I want to figure out what to do. And then they take it and they understand what to do after that. It makes sense. But have you ever seen like a complete shift? And you're like, let's slow the brakes a little bit.
Not necessarily someone saying they love their job. Usually they're like, I'm doing this. I feel pretty fulfilled, but it hasn't been the full like 180. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like it does bring people to like the reality of like, oh, damn, like, yeah, I really don't like this. Like
they were really lying to themselves. And then that authenticity comes out more. Like,
yeah.
Oh, that's not what I wanted. Interesting. And that's interesting you bring that up. I never thought about it like that the authenticity comes out and continues even afterwards, after you take it, right, and you go through your session. And I think back on just my life now. Like, I definitely started being more just upfront with people about situations, just to be like, this is bothering me. Let's work together through this, instead of just holding it back. And it definitely has helped out more. I never even thought about that correlating with it.
Well, even this last week, I posted about it as well, that came up in my group around the idea of simply having no mean no, or like being able to how to stop people pleasing during the holidays and in general. But, we've come as a society, we're so used to saying, oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I insert excuse here. And I was like, how about you guys just simply say, I'm sorry, thanks for the invite, I can't make it. And period. No addition. You don't need to explain yourself. And they're like, you can do that? Like, yeah, you can do that. Like, your no is all people need to know, and you don't need to validate it or explain it. And I think that's something that we're constantly probably unraveling from conditioning from parents, or, whatever it is, of having to have a valid reason for something. And I think even going back to the idea of why you want to leave your job, we feel like it needs to be valid in order to execute.
I feel like, too, as well, when you start doing that as well, bringing the no out more often, there's going to be some people that do think you're being mean or you're being an asshole or whatever. Like, probably not your bestest friends anyways.
Exactly.
But, like, the people that are closest to you, you'll kind of also notice they'll start doing it, too, which is interesting. And you just see it start spreading, which you're like, thank you. I'm glad you're saying no. I'd rather you say no than be at something you don't want to be at that situation.
Yeah, and I think it's part of learning how to hold space for others, too, because if you tell your friend, like, hey, man, I am wiped. This lunar eclipse got me all jacked up. I'm going to go and, like, not skip the podcast. I'm going to take a nap for the next 2 days. They got your back the next time, because they hold space for you, and it's just so refreshing to be like, oh man, I've totally been there, and I'm so glad you didn't come here and try to fake it and be miserable the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it can come from, hey, honoring your sacred no, or also just being real with people But what I love that, Dylan, you brought this in is whether it's a macro or a micro influence, it's really just altering your state of consciousness to allow the pattern to be broken. Right. And I find like it's weird that other people's agendas in life just piles on to our real intention and how we're really feeling. Which, don't get me wrong, I love being suckered into a good time as much as the next guy. But then somehow that turns into a pattern that becomes detrimental to my real intention, to myself, to like how I'm waking up. And then one day you just find yourself like waking up and you're just zonked and you're like, man, I don't have the energy for the shit that I really want to do. And so it kind of turns into this vicious cycle that you feel like you're on a roller coaster you didn't want to be a part of, And so I guess all that lends itself kind of right back to the corporate game when you talk about politics.
I think to your point, Colton, the idea around not just sacred no, but also knowing when you don't need to tell people anything. Like, I was raised by a cop and a teacher. So, definitely psychedelics was not in the household, right? And so my parents have no clue what I do. They know I'm semi-retired, and I am perfectly okay with that because it is not a conversation I think they're prepared for. And, maybe down the line I will share it with them, but I also feel more expansive by not even feeling the need to explain that. And so, going back to Condor, they're like, I told them I was at a week-long training. They're like, oh, what about? I'm like, you don't need to know.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I remember those questions coming up too when I first. I was like, yeah, we're gonna hold off for a little bit before we start saying anything.
Well, some of the terms you were bringing up that I wanted to hop back on, like when you brought up grandmother earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm gonna help our listeners, like if you're not familiar, right? So when you said grandmother, what do you mean by grandmother?
Ayahuasca.
Right. And the same thing with. So this is kind of a fun thing that I don't think we've really talked about much on this podcast, is that different medicines are commonly referred to with different kind of titles. So you have like ayahuasca would be like grandmother. San Pedro often carries a very masculine energy, so that'd be like grandfather, right? I mean, you could kind of go down any number of sorts and find different terms and titles for it. But also when you said like state assessment. So what do you mean when you said like, hey, run a state assessment on yourself? Like, what are you pulling from there?
Well, true to our mentors, Ta and Cole Whitty, they have created a framework around how you can really evaluate where you are at any given point that you feel stuck. And, Colton is a now master of it. I am a now master of it. But a lot of times it's looking at your situation, your thoughts around it. I'm not going to give away the rest because you know what? That's their secret sauce. And I think that there's...
Have you made any content around it? Have you put it out there?
I've shared it with my coaching group, but I have not made content on it yet.
Yeah, well, we should put out some content around that. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Maybe we'll duet it somehow on Instagram.
Well, like one of the fun things that I love about psychedelics is how profound the downloads, I'm saying that in quotes for everyone listening, can be. Okay. Yeah, because like it feels like a literal download from the internet or source or something external. In reality, it's probably really internal. And you get all these like really esoteric terms and like funky words and phrases that come out of psychedelics, but it's a trip, man. You'll have like some people that are super woo-woo about it and other people that are like, I don't know what the fuck any of that means, but it was a blast and I got to see some pretty colors. And so it's so like sacred to each person what they're getting out of it. And I think a lot of it has what you're going into it with. There's, but it's a house of 1,000 mirrors, man. There's so many different ways to unpack that and try and pull at it and see. But what do you see for yourself, like moving forward, working with the medicines and kind of what's the next series of events you feel like that's coming from pulling this thread?
Yeah, man. It's interesting because prior to the end of October, I had no trips planned. Like my entire calendar was pretty empty for the rest of the year. And going back to my comment about having space, out of nowhere, like got a message from another fellow Condor, was like, hey, do you want to come guardian or be a guardian for ayahuasca? I'm like, Yes. So I'm doing that in December. I have potentially 2 of my private clients who are going to be doing journeys by the end of the year. And then we're going to be holding space for a women's retreat in Phoenix in January as a private. So kind of just moving through, like seeing what comes up. And I am holding a holiday microdosing program for people who are just wanting to like kind of get a short trajectory into the path. Knowing that some people have it off from work. And at first I was like, no one wants to microdose during the holidays. And when my girlfriend was like, yes, everyone should microdose during the holidays. Like, so I was like, yeah, maybe you're up to something. So kind of just like continuing to unravel again. Like a year ago, if someone had told me I would be coaching in the microdosing or in the psychedelic world, I would have said that they were high, because I was like, nope, like I'm still a student. I'm just kind of like on my own journey. I have zero interest in holding space for this, and I love it. Like, and I think it goes back to the idea of just like finding something that fuels you, and I get downloads, I get inspiration, I get all sorts of crazy thoughts around like, whoa, I can make a program out of this, or I should share this. And it's funny and trusting that whatever I share online, whether it's on LinkedIn, like putting my shit on LinkedIn has been one of the most scary and also interesting thoughts around like really sharing who I was with people who I used to work with. And like, there's a part of me that I'm like, oh, they think I'm batshit crazy. Like they definitely think I fell out of the spiritual closet and like hit every rock on the way down. And some people are like, damn, like, they're like, thank you for sharing what your story is.
Let them think that though, because they're just watching you be happy and excel,
Yeah.
And they're just afraid of doing something like this. Mm-hmm.
And so, it's part of our work is just be here to inspire people like your former self and help move the path. And so, I'm excited to see what the path continues to bring forward. I think I'm only at the tip of the iceberg of what I'm meant to do here, but we'll see.
You feel like too as well. I feel like when we created this podcast, we kind of felt like there's not much out there. I mean, there's stuff out there, our podcast talking about it, but in the context of like, if you look at the numbers of how many people that are interested in it, and then how much information is out there to find it, it's not that much in comparative, right? So we were like, oh, this is an up and coming thing. We want to get ahead of it. Is that kind of how you feel as well? Is like you are at the tip of the iceberg as these psychedelics are becoming more prominent in the medicinal world?
Absolutely. And, and I have friends who are in Oregon and states that things are becoming legalized. I actually thought about going and getting, certified in a state that is going to be legal. And I've been going back and forth on it, man. Cause like, I don't know if that's the way that everything needs to happen. I think it needs to happen from a government standpoint, but I think that for everyone to be able to get the help that they need, I think that there's still going to be an underground. And I've been wavering on which way I want to go. And for right now, because I'm not going to be moving back to Oregon, I'm like, I'm going to still stay on the underground and, know that the people who are meant to find me will find me.
I think.
By the way, did Colorado pass it today?
Possibly.
Last I checked, Colorado was legalizing it. It was 51-49. They... I don't know, man. That's
Why he's looking that up? Would you consider MAP still the underground? Like they're doing a ton of research, but technically they're not. I don't know if they're working hand in hand with the government yet, but like they're the leading, of course, on everything. Yeah. But I wonder if that would still be considered the underground. It's just popping out.
I think when you start, at least from what I've been told around Portland and Oregon, like because of like having to pay for facilitation fees, their license, all of it's just going to continue to increase the price of the medicine. And one of the most interesting things around, legalized cannabis is that majority of it is all underground because of the price of production, right? So if we have enough growers and what's going to happen with not having the growers also be the facilitators. So the vision of church and state is great, but I think that there's going to continue to kind of price people out who might really need the support. And I'm just here for whichever way I think I need to support in the right way.
obviously with church and state, it's that's being leveraged, of course, to make it come up. Do you think it's a good idea for that to continue at some point, or do you think there should be a point to where this separates from the church and state and it's its own industry?
I know too many people that want to start up psychedelic churches, so I'm probably going to still err that I think there will need to be psychedelic churches, but I don't know how that's going to play in with the government.
I mean, that's just like figuring out the legal side of things. I don't think it. My personal belief would be like, not meddling it into church, because of then you're just kind of conglomerizing all religious experiences. Like any experience that's very difficult to put words to. I was listening to Michael Pollan today, and I clipped the way he described. He was paraphrasing his buddy, the way his buddy was trying to describe. Take a man from the Stone Age, put him in the middle of Manhattan, have him experience just New York at the middle of the day, and then teleport him back to the cave, and him try to tell his buddies. Like, he just doesn't have the vocab. Like big, and large, like loud, shiny.
The sun
like there's
is everywhere.
Yeah, it's like it just doesn't. We don't have the instrumentation. We don't have the tools. We don't have any kind of reference points to integrate that. So I guess right now, like, sure, if that's what it takes to get going, but it's the same idea. But like Rick Doblin is not making any doubts about it. Like, he's like, no, I'm not pushing for medicinal use here. He's like, this should be recreational. But if that's the path we have to go, if we have to show its viability medicinally, sure. And that's something we talk about ad nauseum on this podcast, is like alcohol having to be like proved medicinally benefit for whatever. But it is not official, but the opponents are even conceding like, it's going to pass. So not every single vote's been counted, but as of like an hour ago, they're like, this is a shoo-in. It's going to be legalized in Colorado.
That's awesome.
Did you hear about the psychedelic toad in the national parks? They're telling people not to lick.
I think it's the bufo toad.
I've not seen this amazing thing.
There's a toad in the Sonoran Desert. It's called the Sonoran Desert toad, and I guess people are going out there and licking it because it secretes something to cause psychedelic. And it's just funny that national parks are like, please don't lick mushrooms, please don't lick toads.
There's going to be signs everywhere. Please do not lick the toad.
Please do not
please do not molest the toads.
Can you please point out the toad that I should not lick, please?
Show me on the human where
a great
he touched
example. There's this whole thing going out about it, and I'm like, oh, cool. Let's just add another thing to the list of a natural thing that they're trying to control.
Oh, gosh.
Well, as I was doing research on growing medicinal mushrooms, very legal, regular run-of-the-mill mushrooms in your own house, one of the things I thought was really cool is that, let's say for it's like lion's mane or oyster mushrooms or, whatever, you can order spawn bags. And this is some of the stuff that shows up in Instagram ads, where you just order the box and then you cut the box open and the mushrooms grow out of the side of the box. So these are bags that have already been inoculated with the mycelium. So like they've already done kind of you take the spores from a mushroom, you dump them in some grain. The mushroom goes, oh yeah, I want to eat this stuff. It does all the white stuff inside the bag, right? Now it's inoculated, or it's colonized rather. And then they ship you this bag that's already got all the white stuff, the mycelium. So like that's the main body of the mushroom. So imagine a day, say 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future, where instead of selling you the mushrooms, it's totally legal. They send you a bag, and from this one bag, you can grow an ounce of mushrooms, and it costs nothing to duplicate this. You're talking manure and spores, plastic, cardboard, and logistics of shipping. They can sell you an ounce of mushrooms for like $50 and make a $40 profit on it. And you can get an ounce of medicine right there. And that's just one flush. I mean, you could do multiple flushes here. So I just think it's really, really interesting what could happen when, and Not that I think the pharmaceutical companies give a fucking flying chance in hell of ever letting that take place, but it's really promising, the idea, like if I wanted lion's mane, I can do that. I can, for $50, I can order a box. It'll get shipped here, and within a week, I'll have an ass ton of mushrooms that are great for my brain.
I mean, hell, prime it. Just get it here, store it in the Amazon facility.
That'll be the ultimate coming together of capitalism and consciousness, is when I can 2-day ship some psilocybin right to my front doorstep.
We need to get Bezos on this. You need to call Bezos, Crystal, and get him on your program so we can get this to happen.
See, Colton, I'm like, I want to see the slow motion replay of like your evolution of your growth of your mycelium. Like, I think there needs to be a time lapse camera somewhere.
Oh, I can definitely set one of those up. One of the chicks that I'm following right now, Boomer Shermer, or Shermer Broom. No, I think it's Boomer. Whatever. She's awesome. She does time lapses of all of her stuff. She's like, come learn with me as I'm going through it. And it's really, really cool watching her growth, because she's learning stuff constantly.
Awesome.
And she's just documenting that journey. And so
you should have her on the podcast.
I should. Yeah. Like Rai, we reached out to. Rai was also another great coach. All the coaches and people that I come across, I don't know what your experience has been. Anybody in this field, it's not like I want to get ahead of you. It's like, hey, let's all lift each other up. Let's get notoriety in this field. Let's all push this wave together. Because especially when someone's looking for like a coach in psychedelics, or a coach in general, it's like, hey, if you can expose them to the idea of personal growth and they resonate with you, awesome. But like, it's more about the idea of making someone else better than you found them, right? Giving them some tools of some sort. And I've seen that happen time and time again, where it's like, hey man, I don't care if you work with me. I don't just get in there, go knock it out, champ.
That was the crazy thing to experience from the retreat I met you at was, you had 40 people plus from like different walks of life, different age ranges, ethnicities, whatever it is. And not one single person really was meant to help the same archetype. Like there definitely was like someone there for everyone.
Yeah.
And if there was like a little bit of an overlap, they had just enough nuances in their personality or nuances in the way that they held space that you're like, oh, you would be better with this person, or you would be better with that person. So, you multiply that again. Like I very rarely find, I mean, there is some ego with some, but like I very rarely find someone who's so in it of like, I am like all that there is, and you should only work with me, and never wanting to like share resources or really help lift someone else up, which is freaking beautiful.
I think it's tough when you're getting exposed to psychedelics to have that kind of ego, right? Like mushrooms, I don't know about you guys, man. They do a great job at chopping me at the knees anytime I think I'm something. It's like, hey, buddy. Remember, you come from the earth. I'm just picturing Dylan when he was hovering over me when I'm hugging poison ivy. We were in Tennessee, and I'm just you couldn't have farmed a denser poison ivy on the side of this mountain, and I'm just holding onto the earth, make sure I don't fly away.
Hey guys, I know we're all doing this right now, but you are wallering in it at the moment. And he's like, it's so comfortable, I don't even care. It's a problem for 30 years from now. Like, all right, I'm gonna go over here to the creek. Away from this.
It took care of me though. No poison ivy allergy here, baby. That's the thing to take from that. That retreat was great, and getting to just commingle with so many people that are excited about making contributions to this field and this industry, and you being one of them, right? So I think it's really cool what you're doing with the corporate world. And I mean, is there anything that here's one question that I thought about earlier. What's something that you wish more people asked you about that you don't get asked about enough?
Ooh. Honestly, I think it would be, what have I stopped believing in and what have I started believing in, since experiencing psychedelics? And I think, it's just my mindset and, the woo spectrum has gone so far over from being a former atheist. And that's why I actually started doing like spiritual things I wish I knew when I was back in corporate, like once a week now, where I'll just like share random shit, whether it's Reiki or whether it's crystals or whatever it is, because I think there's a lot of beliefs and frameworks around what we think a spiritual person looks like. And I feel like that's also part of like my work, is really sharing like, hey, you don't have to have it look a certain way, or like just because you're going to take psychedelics and maybe become a spiritual person means you're going to suddenly like have to live in a tiny house and like grow a massive beard and like live with no money. Like, I think there's a balance, you know, going back to what we were talking about before. So I think if I really, I mean, I definitely feel called to write books at some point. So I think that'll probably be a part of it, of like sharing the experience around how everything shifted for me. And everything has shifted with every journey, with every new time, with new modality I take. So it's always an evolution. But I think being willing to let go of a lot of things has been the biggest path for me. So I think it's just been more of like really sharing with people, like, how do you get started, and getting out of their own way, which is the biggest thing.
Love that. Love that.
That was
homie.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of good, stuff packed into that.
Yeah. I don't even know if that was even an answer to a question, but I'm like, it came through. So that's what we're going with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so if people are interested in, you know, getting exposed to more of your work or your content, or, you know, reaching out to you, like, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. You can find me on IG at I am Crystal Morris, and also at my website at iamcrystalmorris.com.
Sick. You got to be probably the most interesting spiritual, non-spiritual person I think I've ever met. So,
oh, I received that. Thank you.
I'm so glad you received that, because that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I've never heard that. I received that. Oh.
Yeah. Well, guys, if you love this episode, remember you can watch all of our episodes on Spotify now. We are in the beta program for that, so we'd love to have you over there checking that out, or on Instagram. Feel free to share any clips from this episode that resonate with you, and be sure to leave us a review. If you're digging Crystal stuff, go check her out. Dylan, am I forgetting anything?
No, well, Crystal, we'll have your information in the description of the podcast. So go down there, click on the links, check her out. Follow the episode, give us a subscribe, up into it, brush up against it, click it, follow Crystal, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye.